Hoi, leuk dat je kijkt naar deze tutorial video over urban sketching. Mocht je nieuw zijn op dit kanaal, mijn naam is Nienke en in deze video laat ik je zien hoe ik van top tot teen een huisje teken, maar ik ga ook lekker spelen met de verhoudingen. Dus het laat je ook gelijk zien wat de creatieve vrijheid is als je gaat urban sketchen. Ik nam deze video eerder op voor mijn Patreon community, die is niet meer online. Daarom is deze video wel in het Engels, dus ik hoop dat die goed te volgen is. Anders kan je altijd even de automatische ondertiteling aanzetten. Leuk om te weten, ik nam deze video op als voorbereiding op een live sessie die ik gaf met mijn collegaatje Anne. Wij hebben namelijk samen 2 cursussen over Sketch Journaling. En dat gaat helemaal over het vastleggen van jouw dag, van jouw herinneringen, zowel op vakantie als je dagelijks leven in je schetsboek. Als je deze video kijkt in de zomer van 2025, dan is het goed om te weten dat er een kortingscode geldt. Je krijgt nu maar liefst €25 korting op beide cursussen of zelfs €50 korting als je de combinatie koopt. Ik zal in de video ook linken naar 2 andere video's die wij eerder hierover maakten en naar de live sessie op Instagram waarin we deze pagina samen af gingen maken. Hopelijk haal je er heel veel inspiratie uit en als je nog meer vragen hebt, stel ze in de comments. Oh ja, en alle materialen die ik gebruik heb ik ook in de omschrijving van deze video gezet. Veel plezier met kijken!
So I'm just sketching a super rough outline as usual with a light blue, and I decided to taper down the bottom of the house just as a fun creative touch. Of course you could draw it really realistic, but I thought it would give a nice little creative spark if I made it a little bit crooked. And that is always the creative freedom that you have. Well, with this super rough outlines, that's all I'm drawing in pencil. And then I got my fountain pen again with waterproof ink, and I started to draw the whole house. This time I started at the top. And as always, my biggest tip is to start with the big shapes and then fill in details. So I already did the big shape in pencil, and now I can fill in the details as I go. And really try to reduce everything into basic shapes. So the top of that house is actually a triangle, and then going down, of course, because I tapered it down. I'm measuring right here if I have the right proportions, but because I tapered it down, it's not a completely rectangle anymore, but that's kind of how you can look at it. It's a rectangle with a triangle on top. And like I just showed you, I used my pen to see if the proportions were right. And because I want to be sure, I left a little bit at the bottom open. So I thought I would just first draw on the windows, and then coming down to the bottom, I would be able to see if there was enough space. And I'm not being too precise with all the angles and details that you see, but just kind of winging it as I go. And that is just all the details that I'm drawing in. And as always, I'm really looking at the proportions. So the top window is kind of 2/3 or 3/4. And then that small bottom window, in this case, there's a little AC unit, is about 1/4. And that's how I'm looking at all the parts. Then we have the front part of the house. And I had to look up what it was called, but it's called a bay window. And because it's coming to the front, those top lines aren't just horizontal, but they're also slightly diagonal. So really by drawing that part by part, you get that effect of that the window is coming to the front. And because I drew the whole house a bit tapered down, that's what I'm doing here as well. And then you have those 2 lines really emphasizing that it is coming to the front. And I'm looking at proportions again. So as always, during the whole drawing, I keep checking the proportions with stuff that I already drew. And in this case, I also used my pen to see how the lines were running. So we often have an idea in our head, is a line going forward, is a line going backwards? And then we tend to draw them either in the wrong direction or too diagonal down or up. So sometimes it really helps to use your pen for that as well. And see, okay, maybe it's going slightly downwards or it's just straight ahead, and get those proportions right. There's some grass in front of the window or in front of the house. I also drew those lines of the curve because that gives a little bit more depth and a little bit more perspective. And I think I drew the grass a bit too, I drew the outline too stiff. So I really tried to open up with the bush on the right to really give that lively effect of all the greenery. And now that we have the big shapes, I'm adding in all those window details again. And again, tapering it down because that's what I choose. So that's really how you can play with proportions and lines of a house. I used the back of my fountain pen to draw in just a few of the curved lines in the windows of the curtains. Yeah, by turning your fountain pen, you get a smaller line and just a more fine line. And if you really press it hard, it gives a little bit darker line. So that's how you can play with one pen, but still have variety in your lines. And another tip is, because we want to show that this is a brick house, is not to draw every brick by brick, but just a few dots here and there. So just by drawing in, as you can see here at the top of windows as well, because they have a different direction, but just by drawing a few, our brains will fill in the blanks. So just by showing a few bricks, our brains know, this is a brick house. So that's a trick for walls, but it's also a trick for the rooftops to suggest a certain structure. And the same with the greenery on the right. I only drew a few little leaves here and there, and your brain knows, okay, that entire part of greenery is filled with leaves. So that's a nice little trick. And to really suggest that this house is in a street, I will also draw the beginning of the houses next to it. I did forget though to taper down those lines too. So if you start with kind of shifting the perspective of playing around with it, you need to do that consistently. I kind of forgot to do it here, but it's okay. It's all practice, so we can improve on that the next time. And I think I'm going to do the same later on as I did in the previous spread that I showed. So I'm only going to color in the middle house and then leave those lines at the sides just black and white, because I really want to put all the attention on that middle house. But yeah, I always find it's fun to draw a little bit of the surroundings so you can really tell where that house lives, who his neighbors are, and what's happening in the whole street. I'm also leaving a slight part of the sides open, so I'm not drawing just up until the edge, but I'm always leaving a little bit of a border white. That's to say why we frame paintings, for instance, because it guides our eyes to the middle of the painting. So it kind of gives you a guideline where to look. So that's a tip. Just leave a little border. I always say our brains like a little bit of white space. And I'm also drawing in those windows that you see in the shaded part. Just really loosely, but it gives a little extra context of what's happening. As you can tell, I also drew that little gate over there. And then we have the left part of the house. I almost forgot it, but there's the entrance, which is almost like a separate part. I think it's probably built on later on, but it really gives this house some character. And it's also fun because it has a different structure. So it isn't brick, but it's wooden. And I'm using the windows on the right to see if my door is at the right position. I think the proportions were a little bit off, but by using those elements that I drew before, checking where everything's going, you kind of can force yourself to at least make it right a little bit. I think it made it a bit too small, but it's okay. And on the left side, there's also 2 bins. I think there's either 4 bins, and there's a motorcycle. I didn't draw everything. So that's always the freedom you have with urban sketching. You can choose what you want to put in the picture, and you can also choose what you want to leave out. So decide for yourself what is catching your eye the most. Is it the windows? Is it the color of the house? Is it a certain element? Is it stuff like a motorcycle in front? And you can of course draw it, but you can also decide to leave it out. in the end I will draw all the electric lights that you see in front, because I think that really gives it that urban feel. But of course you can also choose to leave those out. And as always, the longer I look at the picture, the more I see. So then I also noticed that there was a part of the house on the left that's probably built in later as well. I did feel I left a little bit too much white space on the bottom. So I'm just gonna draw a little bit more of the street in front of the house to kind of fill in those blanks. And then also draw that house on the left. Not entirely, just a few lines to suggest what's happening over there. And later on I will also leave this black and white. Then the house at the front really pops out. Here I'm drawing in those electric lines. And I'm not following the picture exactly. So here as well you can play what works well for your composition. Do you want to draw all the lines? Do you maybe kind of change the direction a little bit? Because I want to draw lettering behind the houses partly later on. I'm just drawing in an extra line on the top. So you really have that element that is overlapping your next element. And that's also a tip we give in our sketch journaling course, because we tend to leave a lot of space in between all the elements that we draw, and then you get kind of that stickery effect, like a little picture over here, a little picture over here. But if you really want to make it a whole, it really helps to overlap. So if you put a little bit of the lettering behind an illustration and then some illustration over your lettering, then it will really bring everything together. For the house, I'm mixing, I think it was burnt sienna or an Indian red. In between I'm constantly putting some extra pigment on my brush, so it doesn't get that super even effect, but there is a slight shift in color, and that makes it more realistic. And down the bottom it's darker, so I added I think some burnt umber in there to also get that shift in color. And by playing with the amount of water versus the amount of pigment, you can use just 1 or 2 colors and already get a lot of difference. Here I'm adding in a little bit of extra water at the front, because those side parts of the bay window are darker. And that also helps emphasizing that the front part is really coming to the front. This is always my favorite part, adding color, because then it really brings your whole illustration to life, and you can already tell that it's making the whole house stand out between all those black and white lines that we did. Here I'm adding some Payne's gray to the bottom, because there's a lot of shadow there, and it's overflowing in the part that's so wet, which is kind of fine. Like at the bottom I don't mind, because I don't want a super harsh shadow here, but on the top I want to keep it light, so that's why I use the tissue and get it away. There are some details in that bottom window, especially some white frames, and I will add those later with a white gel pen or like a white acrylic pen. Sometimes that's easier than really going around all those details. I'm also adding a super light wash of Payne's gray to the windows, because even though they're probably white curtains, they're almost never super white. So that's why I added some shading with just a light wash. And I forgot to give the window frame some color, because they're dark brown in this case instead of white. So I'm also adding in that extra color. And then what really stands out, of course, is the top of the house, that kind of minty green. So I'm mixing a more fresh green with a viridian green that has a more bluish undertone. Next I'm going to do the greenery, and I don't want to use that same green entirely because it's kind of unnatural. But because I want to make this page into a cohesive spread, I don't want to use too many colors. So what I did, I used the same green And then I use the same kind of brick red, the Indian red that I used before. And by mixing that bright green with a little bit of the contrasting color, that red, it kind of dulls it down and it becomes more natural. And then I did the same at the right, and at the bottom part it's already darker, so while the watercolor is still wet, I'm putting in a bit more pigment, also put in a little bit of Payne's Gray to really make it darker. And as you can tell, that already adds that shadow. And try to always keep a little bit of white spots here and there. You can tell, especially in the middle part where I did the grass, I left a few white spots because that suggests the light reflection on the leaves. So try not to fill in the entire space where you draw trees or plants, but leave some white specks here and there, or you can add those later with white gel pen. And now that everything is dry, I'm adding in a few more details. I used the darker red color to also drew in a few extra bricks just to give it a bit more structure. And then of course we still have to paint in the left side of the house because it's part of the same house. And I kind of mixed, I think it was a bit of Payne's Gray, but also, yeah, I used a little ochre here. And maybe also a bit of the Indian red, just mix a few colors to make it that little muddy color that it has. It's a bit grayish, it's a bit brownish. So it's, you sometimes really need to play with your colors to see what works together. So here I added a little bit more Payne's Gray to the top because it's more gray than the bottom part. And then I use the Payne's Gray to add more shading and some extra details on the house as well. And here I am mixing some more ochre. And yeah, I'm adding more color to those front parts because it's really wood. And again, I didn't use the color for the entire surface, but just added it over the first layer. So it really has that structure that not everything is completely even in color, but there are little subtle shifts in color to give it some extra life. And the same at the bottom, that was still white, and because I wanted to fill in that blank space, I used the light wash of Payne's Gray to suggest the street and the curb in front of the window. And while it's still wet, I added some splatter because I always love the effect of some splatter, but I didn't want the curb to be red, so I just mixed it in with the wash while it was still wet, and it gives a little extra color to the street without it being too red. And I think this is about it. I added some extra structure in the roof. And that's every time, this is the thing, when I think I'm finished, suddenly I start to spot extra things. So I added some extra shading, some elements should be darker. So that's always good to kind of go over your painting one last time and see if you think it needs some little touch-ups here and there. And as you can tell, the adding of the shading really helps to bring life to the whole illustration, give it more depth. So if there's one thing you need to take away from the whole course that we give, or from the demo that we give, it's always contrast, contrast, contrast. We say it all the time, but really the difference between the highlights and the dark shading and the midtones, if you balance those out, then you'll have a great painting. After everything was dry, I did go in with my white gel pen and added some highlights here and there. You can really sometimes tell, oh, there's a distinct highlight in the photo. In this case, there weren't that much of a highlights, but just adding a few white lines or dots here and there, like I did over the electric wires, even though they're black, but I think they stand out more in front of the window. So that was a little tutorial. I hope it helps. If you have any questions, as always, put them in the comments and I will answer them there for you. And yeah, I hope you get your sketchbook out and start drawing too.